Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is to take the sources you've provided and, well, unpack the most important insights and those fascinating details.
Yeah, get right into it.
Exactly. And today, we're diving deep into a period of just monumental change. China's shift from the Maoist era towards the beginnings of market reforms.
And the source material guiding our exploration today is drawn from excerpts of a book called The Great Transformation. Now, that title, it's a deliberate nod to Karl Polanyi's classic work.
Right, the one arguing economic systems aren't just inevitable forces.
Precisely. Polanyi argued they're fundamentally shaped by society, politics, culture.
That connection feels really key here, because as we navigate through these sources, what we're really looking at is how the political landscape, the social fabric of China, how that all intertwined with the introduction of markets and capital. This transformation journey, according to the book, it stretches from the 1960s right through the 1980s. And it's a complex story.
Definitely not simple.
No. One of undeniable progress, yes, but also, and the source is clear on this, of continued political dictatorship and significant social costs for the people.
Okay, so let's set the scene then. Our dive begins rather dramatically just after midnight on September 9, 1976 in Beijing. Mao Zedong dies.
And the source paints such a vivid picture of that moment. Mao's body in this makeshift emergency room, building 202 at Zongnanhai.
Yeah. And his staff, the people who'd been with him constantly, they still saw him with this almost godlike reverence.
His will was absolute law, even about whether they could move him when he was dying. He didn't want to leave the compound, so he died right there.
It's fascinating how the source reflects on his legacy. It goes beyond just, power hunger.
Right.
It notes his deep personal detestation for what he saw as old China's weakness. His driving ambition really was to make China rich and strong.
And he thought Marxism, Leninism, those were the tools.
Yeah, he genuinely believed that, particularly that Soviet-style, strong, centralized Communist Party. That was the way.
He also had this relentless idea of continuous revolution.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just the single 1949 revolution. His vision, as the source describes it, was like a series of revolutions, one after another.
From seizing power to...
So land reform, then cooperativization, industrial transformation, and even eventually a revolution in technology. He wanted to overtake Britain.
But, that vision also produced the catastrophe of the Great Leap Forward.
Oh, absolutely devastating. The source really underscores this. By early 1961, at least 30 million people had died. It's hard to even grasp that number.
Did Mao take responsibility?
Well, he did eventually allow parts of the plan to be dismantled. People like Liu Shaoqi led the recovery efforts. But, and this is a crucial insight from the book, the party was incredibly reluctant to take public responsibility. Liu Shaoqi might have privately admitted 70% human mistakes, but publicly, nothing like that. Mao just sort of announced he was withdrawing to the second line, leaving others to clean up the mess.
And that withdrawal, kind of paradoxically, sets the stage for the great proletarian cultural revolution, doesn't it?
Exactly. The source explains this as Mao's move to revive his own leadership and, critically, to purge the party itself. He ordered it in May 1966 from Hangzhou.
He didn't do it alone, though. He had a specific group around him for this.
Oh, definitely. The Central Cultural Revolution Group was formed. Key figures mentioned are his secretary, Chen Boda, Jiang Qing, that's Mao's wife, Kang Sheng, and these younger radicals from Shanghai like Zhang Chengqiu.
And Zhu Enlai.
Zhu Enlai was involved too, yeah. Presiding over meetings, reporting directly back to Mao, kind of managing things.
What really stands out, according to the source, is how Mao reached out to the masses, especially young people.
Yes. He totally bypassed the party structure, spoke directly to them, used that really powerful analogy, didn't he? Taking them on another long march.
Wow.
And the military, the PLA, was absolutely instrumental. They were ordered to support the revolutionary left in seizing power.
Which led to those revolutionary committees.
Right. Popping up across the country, packed with workers, re-educated cadres, and significantly, lots of army officers.
So by mid-67, the source makes it clear this wasn't just ideology anymore. It was a raw power struggle inside the party.
Exactly. The Central Cultural Revolution Group basically weaponized the Red Guards against anyone they saw as an enemy within the leadership.
People like Jiang Qing pushed it further.
Oh, yeah. They framed any criticism. There was this thing called the February Adverse Current. Some military leaders worried about the chaos. They framed it all as an attempted coup. which of course triggered even wider purges.
You mentioned the source noting Mao saw two potential futures by September 67.
Yeah, the book quotes Mao saying the country was really at a crossroads. Either the revolution hits another peak, or these factions would just tear the country apart.
Bleak.
Very. But despite that, it was around then he decided to start, reining in the most radical Red Guards.
Which led directly to the Sent-Down Youth Program, that infamous policy.
Correct. Starting fall 68, the army and worker militias were used to break up the Red Guard groups. And something like 16 million urban young people were sent to the countryside.
For re-education.
Supposedly. Initially, maybe some went with revolutionary enthusiasm, but the source highlights how quickly it became a tool for coercion. Basically, getting potential troublemakers out of the cities.
And the purges weren't just limited to the elite or the youth. That example from Inner Mongolia in the source is just chilling.
It's truly shocking. Party investigators just, fabricated a non-existent underground group. It led to arrests of maybe 800,000 people.
800,000.
And deaths of nearly 100,000. And think about this. 35% of the entire Mongol population ended up imprisoned.
Unbelievable.
And at the same time, huge numbers of Han Chinese were moved into the province, effectively making the Mongols a minority in their own homeland. It just drives home the human cost, the calculated nature of it all.
And through all this chaos, Lin Biao rises up, becomes Mao's designated successor.
Lin Biao, key military guy, made Minister of Defense in 59, first vice premier in 64. He was really the architect of the Mao cult.
The Little Red Book.
That was him. The source portrays him as complex, maybe deeply troubled, but someone Mao initially trusted completely.
A trust that ended very dramatically. September 1971, the plane crash in Mongolia.
Yes. The source gives these details like his wife getting tipped off, their frantic attempt to flee, and Mao's response when asked if they should intercept the plane, just bizarrely detached.
What does he say?
Something like, clouds want to rain and girls want to marry, let them go. His death, shrouded in mystery, just intensified all the infighting among the leaders left behind.
And caught in the middle trying to navigate this was Zhou Enlai. The source even mentions him publicly praising Jiang Qing, calling her a strong Communist Party member.
He was in an incredibly tough spot, trying to restore some kind of function to the government after all the chaos, caught between Mao and this powerful radical left faction.
So the praise was strategic.
Very likely. Just trying to survive, trying to keep the state from completely falling apart. Carefully chosen words were essential.
Which brings us then to Deng Xiaoping. Purge during the height of the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah, Deng got labeled the #2 capitalist roader. His family suffered terribly. His eldest son was left paralyzed. Deng himself got sent off to Jiangxi province, basically under house arrest.
But remarkably, he kept his party membership.
That's a really crucial detail the source highlights. Mao didn't completely write him off.
Why not?
Well, the book suggests maybe partly his military connections, and also Deng wrote this self-criticism document that kind of cleverly praised the Cultural Revolution. So Mao saw, perhaps, a slim chance for his return.
So after Lin Biao dies, the leadership scene is really messy. You've got Zhou Enlai trying to stabilize things.
Right. Then the cautious finance minister, Li Xianian, Guofeng is rising.
Wow.
He promoted the Mao cult, but was also seen as a competent administrator, a potential successor.
And then Deng starts to come back into the picture.
Gradually, yeah.
Right.
Becomes Mao's military deputy, then Minister of Defense in 75. It's a very complex mix at the top.
And all this internal maneuvering is happening just as China starts shifting its foreign policy, right? Moving away from isolation.
Yes, and a big driver for that, according to the source, was growing worry about the Soviet Union.
Which is where ping-pong diplomacy comes in. Seems almost accidental.
It really does. The source notes it started unexpectedly, April 71. People like Zhou Enlai were hesitant, apparently, but Mao suddenly just gave the order to invite the U.S. table tennis team.
Just like that.
Pretty much.
Right.
Which, of course, paved the way for Nixon's historic visit in February 1972.
And the source has that fascinating detail about Mao meeting Nixon.
Yeah, Mao, contrary to China's usual stance, demanding big issues get settled first, he actually admitted Nixon was right. Start with the smaller stuff.
That's quite a shift.
It is.
Yeah.
And the key outcome of that visit, as the source details, was the Shanghai Communique, February 72.
The Taiwan issue was central there, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The most significant part was the U.S. acknowledging the PRC's position. There is but one China, and that Taiwan is a part of China. The U.S. stated it didn't challenge that position and affirmed its ultimate goal of withdrawing forces from Taiwan. Monumental.
The book also touches on these very early tentative steps towards economic opening, like embassies trying to find export opportunities.
Yeah, but finding the quality of Chinese goods just wasn't really there yet. It was a bit disappointing for them.
And it highlights the absolutely essential role of Hong Kong.
Oh, totally crucial. Its lack of currency controls was vital for moving money, moving goods. By the early 70s, over half of China's foreign currency earnings were being channeled through Hong Kong.
And then there's that really eye-opening detail about the illegal stuff, smuggling, black market.
Exploding, yeah. Especially between collective enterprises in Guangdong province and Hong Kong. The book mentions some collectives even set up commercial operations in Hong Kong itself.
But the craziest part is the military involvement.
Right. Local military, border units, sometimes sharing in the profits from these illegal operations, even though organizers could literally get the death penalty if caught.
Wow. The pull of economic gain must have been incredibly strong even then.
It seems so. Meanwhile, the source notes Mao, in his final years, is still intensely focused on the Soviet threat, warning European leaders even as his health failed and he could barely speak.
His brain still worked, though.
Apparently, he told a German visitor in 75 something like, "My body is failing, I can't speak clearly, but my brain still works. I know who the enemy is." Still sharp in his way.
Okay, let's jump back to 76, right after Mao's death. The source describes Guofeng making his move, consolidating power.
Right, leading that coup against Jiang Qing and the Gang of Four.
And the book gives these specific, almost cinematic details about the arrests. October 76.
Yeah, Hua arrived early for a meeting. Wang Hongwen, Zhang Chunqiu, Yao Wenyuan arrested as they walked in.
And Jiang Qing.
Apprehended separately in her apartment. The source notes she refused handcuffs at first, even demanded an envelope for Hua to hold her safe key. Asked who ordered the arrest, who spoke for the Central Committee now.
Quite defiant.
Seems like it. Meanwhile, Hua, the old guard marshal Ye Jianing, and the security chief Wang Dongxing were reportedly just outside Huan Hall smoking cigarettes as her car drove past after the arrest.
So the immediate result is a huge setback for the CCP left.
Absolutely. The source highlights they didn't really have a program beyond Mao himself, made them easy scapegoats for all the failures of the Cultural Revolution.
And Jiang Qing took a lot of the blame.
A huge amount, yeah, compounded by, existing misogyny within the party, too.
But by the end of 77, the party had survived. No civil war, surprisingly.
Yeah, and the source gives Hua Guofeng a lot of credit for that. Notes his careful balancing act, protecting Mao's legacy while bringing back purged officials, and also prioritizing economic improvement.
But the book also points out that really crucial early reforms were already bubbling up in the provinces, before Beijing policy was even clear, on Hui, Sichuan.
Yes, Zhao Ziyang's work in Sichuan from 75 is such a key example. He allowed farmers more experimentation, let them use local knowledge, and crucially, let them keep more of their income.
And it worked.
The results were immediate, significant. Agricultural output in Sichuan jumped 6% in 1977 alone. This was happening organically, people testing the system's limits.
By 78, though, the source shows Hua Guofeng's position starting to weaken. Deng's allies putting on the pressure.
Yeah, he faced pressure to make self-criticisms, encourage reports to the wider Central Committee, not just consolidate power around himself. This sort of set the stage for that pivotal third plenum in December 1978.
And that's where Deng and his allies really take control, right?
According to the source, yeah. They effectively sidelined Hua, seized the agenda, set the course for dealing with the past and launching the reform era. The book suggests Deng decided to push harder than maybe he initially planned.
Worried about cautious leaders slowing things down.
Perhaps, yeah. Concerned maybe leaders like Chen Yun might put the brakes on too much.
And one of the first big actions was this massive push, starting in 77, to import foreign technology.
The source actually labels it an importation great leap forward.
Which sounds ambitious.
And it certainly had the scale. An initial plan for $6.5 billion in imports just ballooned to over $18 billion in less than a year.
What were they targeting?
Huge projects, 10 massive oil fields, 10 big steel plants, major chemical works, all supposed to be done within a decade. Some planners, the book notes, were just horrified by the cost and the scale.
But Deng was fully behind opening up like this.
Oh, completely. The source quotes him urging officials like Gumu after his trip to Western Europe to liberate our minds and, crucially, to learn from the advanced and positive experiences of capitalist countries.
That phrase alone, remarkable for the time.
Absolutely. And this willingness to learn from the West, it culminates in reestablishing formal diplomatic ties with the U.S., January 1st, 1979.
And the U.S. recognized the PRC, acknowledged the position on Taiwan.
Right, reiterating the Shanghai Communique while ending its defense treaty with Taiwan. A huge step.
Deng's visit to the U.S. in February '79 must have been incredibly impactful for him.
You have to imagine so. The source mentions him visiting places like Coca-Cola, Boeing. He was apparently both impressed and, frankly, a bit frightened by the sheer wealth and industrial capacity he saw.
Really highlighted China's relative weakness.
Starkly. And it just reinforced his conviction that China had to pursue material progress, and fast.
That impression, plus China's brief, costly war with Vietnam right after which showed military weaknesses, it all just solidified Deng's view, didn't it? Need for unity, need for rapid economic development.
Exactly. And it's around this time that Deng first starts articulating the concept that becomes known as one country, two systems.
Initially for Hong Kong.
Yeah, he first discussed it with British envoys about Hong Kong's future, later applied the idea to Taiwan, Tibet too. The core principle, as the book describes it, was letting these regions keep their own systems, their ways of life, even self-defense forces for Taiwan, as long as China regains sovereignty.
So while we see these big top-down policy shifts, the source really emphasizes that another profound transformation was happening from below.
This is where the story gets really personal, I think. Really compelling. People were just tired, tired of the grinding poverty that lingered after the Cultural Revolution.
So individuals, families, clans, they started taking matters into their own hands.
Pretty much. Experimenting with things like expanding private plots, bringing back markets in rural areas, often without any explicit permission from the state initially, just testing the limits.
And those bottom-up efforts, they actually had real results.
Oh, yeah. Market towns that had basically withered away under socialist policies started flourishing again. Farmers were getting back into the money economy.
And the source notes, by '78, farmers were often earning more cash from their little private plots than from the wages they got from the collective farms.
That statistic alone tells you so much, doesn't it? How powerful that shift in incentives was, driven by individual initiative, right there on the ground.
Then you have the establishment of the special economic zones, the SEZs, deliberate laboratories for development.
Right. And Guangdong province became a key testing ground. It was far from Beijing, geographically, and importantly, it was led by Deng allies, people he trusted like Xi Zongxin and Zhao Ziang.
And got an unprecedented autonomy.
By 1980, yeah, they could set up their own trading companies, keep foreign currency earnings, pay a fixed amount to the central government instead of a percentage, even experiment with wage and price reforms. I mean, that was radical stuff back then.
But the book is clear. These changes weren't painless. There were real social costs for ordinary people.
Absolutely. Markets brought opportunities, sure, but price increases hurt, especially the poor. And crucially, workers in these new, more market-oriented enterprises started losing the iron rice bowl.
That whole package of job security, free housing, healthcare, pensions.
Gone, or starting to go. And Chinese citizens responded to this uncertainty in a very telling way. They started saving massively. Their bank deposits quintupled between 1978 and 1984.
Wow. And out of this environment, you start seeing China's first sort of private or semi-private enterprises emerge. The story of Ping An Insurance is amazing.
It really is. The source describes how Ping An started in the Shekou industrial zone, basically, because workers there, losing their iron rice bowl, desperately needed social safety nets, insurance.
So they found a loophole.
Pretty much. They found some obscure 19th century company law, pitched it to the authorities as just a temporary thing that would eventually merge with the state insurer, and it worked. Ping An grew into the giant it is today, a direct result of market need driving innovation from below, finding ways around the state structures.
And there were others, like Lenovo.
Yeah, Lenovo grew out of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Stone became the first software company.
Clustering in Zhongguancun.
Exactly, around the universities in northern Beijing, now famous as China's Silicon Valley. The book describes villagers renting out land, local townships investing. Foreign visitors hitting Electronic Street were apparently struck by the mix of Chinese and imported goods.
And of course, foreign companies started trickling back in. Coca-Cola.
Which had been banned as this symbol of imperialism. Overtures started in '75. Deng himself agreed in '78 to allow sales, a joint bottling plant. Hitachi set up the first big Japanese joint venture in '81.
And being a cope salesperson became prestigious.
Incredibly. The source mentions thousands applying, including highly educated people like pediatric surgeons, former party officials. It just signals this fundamental shift in what success and opportunity look like.
So you have this powerful dynamic, big policy changes from the top, colliding and combining with this immense initiative, this experimentation bubbling up from below. But the source also makes a point of highlighting the profound contradictions in Deng's whole approach.
This is so key to understanding modern China, I think. Deng wanted economic reform, opening up, because he believed it was essential for the party's survival, for strengthening China.
But he was worried about the side effects.
Deeply worried about lack of dedication to the party line, and critically, about social unrest coming from all the changes. He wanted economic freedom, but absolutely not political freedom. That was the line.
And that tension explains why he put conservatives in charge of ideology and propaganda. People like Hu Qiumu, Deng Liqun.
Yes, exactly. And why you saw things like the spiritual pollution campaign in 1983, cracking down on anything seen as too liberal, too humanist. The source notes, Deng worried these ideological mistakes could bring disaster upon the country. He was constantly trying to balance control and change.
The book also brings in Chen Yun as another important figure in this balancing act.
Right. Chen Yun, another senior leader. He supported economic reforms, but he had a much more cautious vision than Deng.
He wanted the planned economy to stay dominant.
Pretty much. Market forces should be strictly controlled. They should serve socialism and party rule, not drive the whole system. He was a significant counterweight to Deng's faster, more open approach.
And it's worth circling back to the source's point about why people were doing this from below.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily about getting rich quick.
No, for many, maybe most, it was simply about trying to build a better life after years and years of hardship. They were testing limits, pushing boundaries, often without fully realizing they might lose that socialist safety net they'd relied on, the free healthcare, education, job security.
That fundamental striving, born of hardship.
It ultimately laid the groundwork for the improved living standards many Chinese enjoy today, even with all the complexities.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what really emerges from these sources is this picture of China's great transformation from the 60s to the 80s that is just incredibly complex, a mass of contradictions, as the source puts it.
It absolutely defies any easy, simple explanation, doesn't it? It's a story of monumental change driven, well, simultaneously by deliberate, sometimes ruthless decisions from the top.
And by tenacious, often unauthorized, actions from individuals and communities on the ground. That bottom-up push.
Exactly.
And the fact that this whole era of reform and opening emerged from the ashes of the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
The book emphasizes that was almost impossible to foresee at the time.
Which leads to where things get really interesting today. Because the source leaves us with this thought, and it really resonates now.
What's that?
It notes that, yeah, it's hard to imagine a more liberal China emerging under the current leadership. But the book suggests it could happen if people eventually tire of the current regime.
But there's a flip side.
There is. The country could also slide the other way towards increased repression internally and maybe greater friction globally. It's uncertain.
So given China's huge global significance right now, why does understanding this specific, uncertain, contradictory journey from its recent past matter for you? That feels like the question to ponder long after we finish this deep dive.